Well, I'm very pleased to say that joining me now is former White House Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor at Bondi Partners. You know him well, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, just 2 weeks away from the first presidential debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Extraordinarily early this season. We've just seen what Joe Biden went through at the G7. The big question is, can he get through this debate?
Probably, James. It's a great question to ask. I understand it's going to take as many as 10 days off before the debate. Keep in mind, he was able to sort of get up for the State of the Union speech back in January, raising a bunch of questions as to how he was able to do that. But certainly, I do expect him to be at the top of his game to the extent there is a top of his game at this point. The White House will control his schedule heavily in the run-up to that debate, simply because if he messes that up too badly, there's already some talk here again about possibly replacing him at the top of the ticket if things go poorly for him in 2 weeks.
But, you know, it does seem like we've got an increasingly serious situation here with the president, Mick, and I don't want to make light of it at all, but, you know, we are weeks away from this debate, and we did see that performance. I hear that he's going to spend up to 10 days at Camp David out of the glare of the spotlight, recovering from that G7 and doing prep. And there's some speculation that he may be medically revived in some way, that there may be some sort of drug cocktail that he may be put on to, you know, help him have the energy and the sort of the ability to get through it in the same way of the State of the Union, as you mentioned. Your thoughts on that?
Sure. The drug is modafinil. It's available over the counter in a couple of countries, I think, including Mexico. It's only available by prescription here. It's a very low-level amphetamine. It is used by long-distance bombers in our Air Force when they have to go on long missions in order to stay sharp over long periods of time. I have taken it after especially long international trips and so forth when I was in the White House. But yeah, I think it's a fair question to ask as to whether or not anybody on the stage is having to use those things in order to be at the top of their game. I'm very candid with you as to when I've taken it, when I haven't, prescribed by the White House doctor. Be curious to know if the White House prescribes it for Joe Biden as well. And I think it's a fair question for Donald Trump to ask, or for the moderators to ask at the debate.
Yeah, and so let's war game some scenarios here. If he does get through it, and I'm with you, I think he is going to bring the closest thing Joe Biden has to an A game. Does this refresh the Democrat campaign? Does it say, you know, oh, look, we can put all of that sort of stuff behind us. Look at this. He was okay. He didn't go wandering off the stage. He didn't do anything, you know, ridiculous. Does this give Biden a new lease on life? And does it vindicate the idea of having that debate so early in the cycle?
James, if he does well, if Biden does well, let's say he does as well at the debate as he did at the State of the Union, it will simply level the playing field. If he gets on stage and they ask him what the most important thing happening in Gaza is, and he says, I like peaches, then this campaign is over and they're probably seeking to replace him before the convention. But if he has a decent debate performance, then he still has to deal with all of the real issues. Not that his capacity isn't a real issue, but let's say with all of the macroeconomic issues. He's got to deal with inflation. He's got to deal with immigration. He's got to deal with Israel, the three I's. So yes and no. If he has a good debate, it doesn't mean he wins. It just means he's right back to a level playing field, having to defend his own policies. And he could easily lose on that, even if he's completely mentally capable.
Well, but let's chuck another variable into this, of course, Donald Trump. Now, if he comes into the debate and he comes on too hard, do you think that that there will be some, you know, sympathy vote elicited for Biden? That people say, and the media will say, oh, look, Trump acted like a bully on stage. Does Donald Trump need to watch himself in how he conducts himself on stage?
Yeah, and there's certainly the risk of that. Keep in mind, he did not fare very well in the first debate between the same two gentlemen back in 2020. He forgot the classic rule of politics, which is when your opponent is digging a hole, don't take away their shovel. And he interrupted Joe Biden several times when he should have let Joe just talk for half an hour. And in large part, he struggled in 2020 because of that poor debate performance. I'm talking about Donald Trump now. He runs the same risk here. Keep in mind, there's going to be very few people in this election who are actually voting for Joe Biden. This election is turning into a referendum again on Donald Trump. There'll be people voting for Donald Trump and against Donald Trump. So what he needs to do is just remind people that he is an acceptable replacement to Joe Biden. If he goes on and and has as bad a debate performance as he had in 2020, they may remember that they didn't like him very much and vote for Joe Biden just because they're voting against Donald Trump. So yes, it's a real risk, and I hope that the campaign sees it by now.
Yeah. Look, that's going to be fascinating to watch, and I cannot wait for this debate. I don't think I've looked forward to a debate as much as this one. But I want to move on to this other fascinating bit of news out of Washington, where the U.S. House of Representatives voted this week to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress over the refusal to hand over the audio tapes of that infamous Biden interview with special counsel Robert Hur. Now, we've heard all of the excuses. They don't want AI deep fakes made of him. I mean, I don't even know how that begins to work. But it seems to me that this would seem to vindicate the Republican case that the Justice Department is trying to shield the Bidens from embarrassment here. Or am I just being cynical?
No, you're not. It's also exposing something that we need to deal with as a nation. Keep in mind, Eric Holder was held in contempt when he was the Attorney General, and a Democrat administration did nothing about it. Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon, Republicans, were held in contempt by Democrats in the House during the January 6th hearings, and a Democrat Department of Justice is putting them in jail. Now you've got a situation where Republicans are going to hold Merrick Garland, a Democrat Attorney General, in contempt, and the Democrat Department of Justice is going to do nothing about it. We need a consistent application of the law. Right now, it looks like the only time that congressional subpoenas are enforced is when the same party's in charge of the Department of Justice in the White House as is in charge of Congress, and that's not right. Eric Holder should be held to the same standard that Steve Bannon was, and that Merrick Garland should be. Either everybody's in contempt or nobody's in contempt. It shouldn't depend on whether or not there's an R or a D after your name.
Well, no, absolutely right. And I mean, if we don't get back to that, I think the Republicans are in a lot of trouble. But finally, I want to just ask you about this thing that happened. You've got the annual congressional baseball game. And if you look at your screen here, I think we've got some footage of climate activists, who I haven't heard from for a while, storming the field and then getting absolutely bodied by these cops here. Look at this on your screen. Tell us about what happened here, Mick.
Yeah, your point is a good one. We haven't heard much from the climate activists in Washington, D.C. Maybe they feel like the Palestinian protesters are getting all of the attention. And in fact, the Palestinian protesters protested last night during the national anthem, during the American national anthem. That gives you some insight as to where they're coming from. But these were climate activists. By the way, I'm on a television program in the United States tonight as we tape this, and we invited those same people to come on television and explain to us why they did what they did, and they turned us down. So this was an attention-getting thing. They wanted to go out and get social media for their social media feeds. They weren't interested in a debate. That's exactly what this was about. But that's so often the case, it seems.
Yeah, well, Mick, it's so funny. We were saying before we came on air, we were saying, gosh, we haven't heard from the climate people before. And I think if the Gaza people have done one thing, it has made me miss the climate people. Mick Mulvaney, thank you so much for your time. We'll see you next time here on the U.S. Report.